Hi guys, it's Mr. Malillo. I wanted to record a video describing the passages from the Part 2 test in a little bit more detail for you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break them down even more than we did in class together. So I want you to do a couple things. First, I want you to get your textbooks out. I want you to read along the passages with me. And then secondly, I want you to have your passage analysis sheet out so that you can add some of what I'm going to discuss here onto your sheet so that you're well prepared for when you see the passages on the test on Friday. And here we see a nice picture of Odysseus' revenge taking care of those suitors. So let's go to that first passage on page 996. I'll give you a second to flip to that page in your textbook. And I'll talk a little bit about the context of the passage while you guys get ready. This is at the beginning of part two. After Odysseus has spoken to Athena, she tells him to reveal himself to his son. So, in one moment, Odysseus is disguised as the beggar right in front of Telemachus, and before his very eyes, he gets transformed into this young, strong, vibrant-looking Odysseus. And Telemachus is caught in disbelief. He's amazed at this transformation, and he doesn't believe it's his father. He believes it's some trick that the gods are playing on him. And Odysseus reacts pretty harshly to him here. So I'm going to read the passage. Our first sentence: "This is not princely to be swept away by wonder at your father's presence. No other Odysseus will come." Oops, sorry. "No other Odysseus will ever come, for he and I are one, the same. His bitter fortune and his wanderings are mine. 20 years gone, and I am back again on my own island." So I'll start with the explain what's being said part here, and we'll go sentence by sentence to break it down. So first we have, "This is not princely to be swept away by wonder at your father's presence." And I think this is an important phrase, not only in the passage, but in the entire epic, because it shows a lot about how he treats his son right off the bat. This phrase, "not princely to be swept away," means he's not acting like a prince, which means, by extension, one day the prince will be king, that he's not acting like someone who will one day rule Ithaca, someone who will succeed Odysseus. So it's like he's almost failing his father, or what he thought his son should be like when he returned. Sentence number two: "No other Odysseus will ever come, for he and I are one, the same. His bitter fortune, his wanderings are mine," saying that I am that Odysseus. I am your father, the one you've heard all these stories about. No other person's going to come. It's me. I'm finally back. And his bitter fortune and his wanderings are mine, I think is saying, even though Telemachus doesn't know this, one day he'll know the story about Odysseus' journey after the war, saying that those hardships are mine. That is my story to tell. And then finally, 20 years gone, and I am back again on my own islands. That he's saying, I've been gone for this long, for 20 years, but now I'm back and I'm ready to take what's mine. So let's talk about some of the characterization of Odysseus that we see here. And again, I want to look to this first sentence in the passage. "It is not princely to be swept away by wonder at your father's presence." I think it's a pretty critical judgment of Telemachus from his father. And what he's saying is, a prince can't be astonished by these things. A regular person could, but not a prince, not my son. You need to act without emotion. You cannot be surprised by these things. You are expected to behave a different way, a better way. And I think that's both an example of strict, harsh judgment from Odysseus, but also some tough love from Odysseus that I think Telemachus pretty dearly needs to grow up out of the immaturity that he's in. He's a 20-year-old boy. He should be a 20-year-old man, we should be calling him, but he acts like a 13-year-old boy. So he's not what Odysseus was expecting. So we could talk about sort of the judgment and the tough love and trying to bring his son up to what he needs to be, sort of bring him from the immature to the mature. No other Odysseus will ever come, for he and I are one. That's pretty straightforward. But I like this phrase, "his bitter fortune and his wanderings are mine." And I think we could talk about a changed Odysseus, that now that he's back, he sort of understands the errors in his ways of when he was traveling along with his men for those 10 years, that now he's a changed Odysseus. He realizes now that he's home and he's so close, he could see the error of his ways in the past. So we could talk about some growth there as well. And then 20 years gone, and I am back again on my own island. This is now we're seeing confidence from Odysseus, which we've seen before, but this is good confidence that he's really confident in his ability to take back what's his. He's on his home turf, and I think that empowers him. That being home, he has this rejuvenated energy. Not to mention the fact that Penelope is also helping him out. So, in terms of that analysis, I think we could talk about the harsh judgment, the way he might have changed, and how he sees himself going forward now that he's back home. We could also talk about just strength in general we see from Odysseus, and this concept of manhood being presented as well. So let's continue on. We see here Telemachus is not really too happy with what his father just said about him, but he'll get over it. So we have passage 2 on page 1004. So I'm going to give you guys a minute to flip to that page. Okay, so hopefully we're all on page 1004. This is some of the background context. This is right after the beggar Odysseus has walked through his hall and been treated pretty poorly by Antinous. And Penelope sees this man and says, well, this man has been wandering around. Maybe he's seen my husband Odysseus. Bring him to me. Let me ask him some questions. So she asks for him to come meet with her. And she asks him questions about where he's from. And he avoids that topic and then transitions to complimenting Penelope. So let's look at what he says right here. And this is Odysseus speaking to Penelope. And he replied, my lady, never a man in the wide world should have a fault to find with you. Your name has gone out under heaven like the sweet honor of some God-fearing king, who rules in equity over the strong. His black lands bear both wheat and barley, fruits trees laden bright, new lambs at lambing time, and the deep sea gives great hauls of fish by his good strategy so that his folk fare well. And this is one of my favorite passages in the story. I love Penelope as a character, and this shows what kind of leader she's like. So breaking it down, let's look at this first sentence. My lady, never a man in the wide world should have a fault to find with you. So in terms of the comprehension of the passage, he's telling her that no man could ever find something wrong with her, no fault, no flaw. So in other words, he's saying, you're perfect, Penelope. No one could ever find something to criticize you about. Sentence number 2, we have the beginning of an epic simile, so I'm going to start here. Your name has gone out under heaven like the sweet honor of some God-fearing king. And here, he's talking about her name, but it's really her reputation. And her reputation has gone out all the way to the gods up on Mount Olympus. And that reputation is just like the reputation of some God-fearing king. So she's pretty well known for being a leader just like this God-fearing king. And the rest of the epic simile breaks down what this king is like so we could figure out if he's a good or bad king. And this phrase, God-fearing king, we could talk about some of the characterization as well. If you're God-fearing, that means you fear the gods. And if, by extension, if you are afraid of the gods, you're going to treat them pretty well. You're going to treat them with respect. So already we could think about some of the characterization of Penelope and the God-fearing king, that they're both respectful to the gods. And that's an important concept during that culture. Continuing, this king rules in equity over the strong, and this equity means fairness. So he's a fair king. He's a respectful king. And then it talks about the kingdom. His black lands bear both wheat and barley, so there's a lot of crops. Fruit trees laden bright, there's a lot of fruit. New lambs at lambing time, there's livestock. And the deep sea gives great hauls of fish by his good strategy so that his folk fare well. So that there's a lot of crops, there's a lot of fruit, there's a lot of livestock, there's a lot of fish from, I guess we could call it hunting. So there's a lot of food and resources for the people to survive, so that his folk are faring well, that they're pretty happy with their kingdom and their king. So if we now want to talk about the characterization of Penelope, everything that's true about this God-fearing king is true about Penelope. So already we know no fault to find. That means she's perfect, or at least in Odysseus' eyes, she's perfect. She's respectful. If the king rules in equity, Penelope also rules in equity. So she's a fair queen. She's a fair ruler. And she takes that kingdom and treats it well, having food for her people, resources so that they're not left wanting, they're not starving, and that they also are happy. So the people of Ithaca are happy with Penelope, and this is all going to develop the point that Penelope is a great leader, and we could talk about here in our analysis as being a fair, just, good, strong ruler. Um, I also like this phrase. Your name has gone out under heaven. That reminds me of way back in part one when Odysseus says, "My fame has gone abroad to touch the sky's rim," where he's boasting about his confidence and his fame, his reputation has gone all the way to the gods. And he's sort of saying that again with Penelope, but this time for a good reason, not a hubristic way, but for a very good reason that she's well known as a queen. And I think that's an interesting comparison, an interesting connection that Homer makes towards the end of the story. Let's move on to passage number 3. We can see here Penelope, she's so touched by the kind words of Odysseus. So now let's go to passage number 3, and I'll give you guys a second to pull that up in your textbook. So not too long after the previous passage, we have this current one. It's at the bottom of page 1004, and the previous one was at the top of 1004. And it's Penelope describing to this beggar Odysseus how she was able to hold off the suitors for so long. So let's take a look at it. It's a lengthier passage. Ruses served my turn to draw the time out. First, a close-grained web I had the happy thought to set up weaving on my big loom in the hall. I said that day, "Young men, my suitors, now my lord is dead, let me finish my weaving before I marry, or else my thread will have been spun in vain. It is a shroud I weave for Lord Laertes, when the cold death comes to lay him on his bier. The country wives would hold me in dishonor if he, with all his fortune, lay unshrouded. I reached their hearts that way, and they agreed. So every day I wove on the great loom, but every night by torchlight I unwove it, and for 3 years I deceived the Achaeans," which is the suitors. So now let's talk about what's being said directly here. So she's ruses is a word that means tricks. So she's talking about the tricks that she came up with to hold off the suitors. She said to them, and this is a phrase of dialogue from Penelope, saying, "Now that my lord, my husband, is dead, let me finish weaving before I marry, or else my thread will have been spun in vain. It is a shroud I weave for Lord Laertes when the cold death comes to lay on him on his bier." So Lord Laertes is Odysseus' father, who hasn't died yet. He's off farming during most of the story. And she's saying, "Let me honor him for when he dies. I'll weave this beautiful shroud that we can wrap him in. And once that's done, once I've honored the commitments to Odysseus' family, now I can move on to choose a new suitor." And everyone agrees with that. The country wives, especially, would hold her in dishonor. They would be aghast at Penelope's behavior if she didn't do this for Laertes. So there was really no way that anyone would argue with her, which was pretty clever. Um, and then she says, "I reached their hearts that way. I moved them, and they agreed. But every day she would weave on the loom, but every night she would unweave it, or unwove it, so that she would undo most of the work that she did. And that lasted for about 3 years. So she was pretty clever in doing that. So now let's talk about this idea of loyalty to family that we see. And first and foremost, we could talk about that. The reason that she's holding off these suitors for down here for 3 years and then some is that she has not given up faith that Odysseus will come back to her. So she still has that loyalty to her family. I think another thing that we could talk about is that shroud for Lord Laertes, about honoring Odysseus' family, that she is still loyal to that family. Even though it is a ruse, it is something that she's using to trick the other people. She's still showing the respect to that family. Some other things that I think we could talk about here is that mentioning the overall time that she waited, that it's been 20 years at this point, that she still has not chosen a new suitor, holding the men off for that long. Um, in addition to that, we could talk about um, not giving up hope that Odysseus will return, or this commitment that she's honoring to Odysseus, that by tricking the suitors, by unweaving it each night, she's honoring her marriage commitment and her vows to Odysseus, by not choosing another. And then we could talk about, she doesn't really talk about ever falling in love or considering loving another man besides Odysseus. So these are all things that we could talk about in terms of the analysis of this theme of loyalty to family there. So let's continue on. Let's move to our fourth passage, and that is going to be on. Oh, we see. Actually, I want to go back to this. This is an image of what we think the shroud that Penelope was weaving. We have an image of a real life loom, something that she would weave it on, and we think this is what the shroud would have looked like when she completed it. So I thought that was pretty cool to include. Now on to passage 4. That's on page 1011. I'll give you guys a minute to flip to that before I jump into the analysis. So this passage is in Odysseus' revenge, and the events that preceded it were Odysseus killing Antinous with the bow, revealing himself to the suitors as the true Odysseus, and Eurymachus standing up and offering to pay restitution, to repay Odysseus for everything that he and the other suitors had taken, and then some, in exchange for their lives. And this is Odysseus' response. So let's hear what he says. Not for the whole treasure of your feather, or should be father, excuse me. All you enjoy lands, flocks, or any gold put up by others, would I hold my hand. There will be killing till the score is paid. You force yourselves upon this house. Fight your way out or run for it. If you think you'll escape, I doubt one man of you skins by. So the explanation of what's being said here, and it's a pretty straightforward passage. Let's look at the first part of it. Our first sentence here: not for the whole treasure of your father, all you enjoy lands, flocks, or any gold put up by others, saying no amount of money that you could ever give to me would hold my hand, would stop me from getting my revenge on you. So no matter how much Eurymachus and the other suitors offered to pay, he would never accept it because he doesn't want money, he wants revenge. There will be killing till the score is paid. Pretty straightforward. I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to kill all of you until I feel like I've been repaid, that you are all dead, and that's the only repayment I'll accept. And he says, you forced yourselves upon this house, meaning they weren't invited guests, and when they were there, they were very bad guests, and they refused to leave. So he's, again, invoking this idea of Xenia here, that they are being bad guests in his home. And he kind of throws an offer out there, but it's not something that they could really take up. He says, fight your way out or run for it if you think you'll escape death. So he's saying you could run, but you won't. I doubt one man of you skins by. He's very confident in his ability to kill the rest of the men. So let's talk about this concept of Xenia now. One thing that you want to make sure that you discuss in your analysis is that Xenia is the relationship between a guest and a host. And you could talk about that it's a two-way street, and that if a guest is being bad to the host, they deserve to be punished by the gods. And absolutely, that's what's being talked about right here. You force yourselves upon this house. They're being extremely bad guests for years, eating all their food, stealing from them, taking whatever they could, that they really should not be there. They should have left. They should have honored Penelope's desires for them to leave, but they did not. So they need to be punished for that. You could talk about that the suitors need to be punished. There will be killing till the score is paid. That the punishment is going to be doled out, or it's going to be given by Odysseus. That he's killing the suitors because they broke the law of the gods. And you could mention that because of that, Odysseus actually isn't violating Xenia even though he is killing guests in his home, because he's giving them the punishment that they deserve. Um, I think that's a pretty straightforward passage. So we're gonna move on to that. We have another representation of the Odysseus killing the suitors, and again, they don't really stand much of a chance with Odysseus and his bow, and the guys huddled behind their shields, and looks like they're, I don't know, someone's holding up the leg of a table or maybe a weapon. They don't really stand much of a chance, as you can see from the dead bodies there too. Let's go to that last passage, passage number 5 on page 1017, and I'll give you guys a minute to flip to that. So this passage is the final section of the story. It's after Penelope's test. She's tested Odysseus with the comment about moving the bed. He's proven he's the real Odysseus, and now they are finally reunited. So let's look at this and see what's going on here. We have an epic simile that's most of this passage. Now from his breast into his eyes the ache of longing mounted, and he wept at last. Sorry, that should be last. His dear wife, clear and faithful in his arms, longed for, as the sun-warmed earth is longed for by a swimmer, spent in rough water where his ship went down under Poseidon's blows, gale winds and tons of sea. Few men can keep alive through a big surf to crawl, clotted with brine on kindly beaches, enjoy, knowing the abyss behind. And so she too rejoiced, her gaze upon her husband, her white arms round him pressed as though forever. So let's talk about the breakdown here. We see that there's from Odysseus and Penelope, that they're finally together. They get to embrace one another, and this idea of longing, this yearning, or this feeling that they miss one another, is finally over, and they get to. He weeps at last, and his wife weeps with him. That they're this long, painful journey is finally over for them. And then it makes a comparison between the longing between Odysseus and Penelope as the longing between a swimmer and the sun-warmed earth. And then we have an epic simile to show why the swimmer misses the earth so much, and the earth not meaning the planet Earth, but the ground. So the swimmer is spent in rough water where his ship went down under Poseidon's blows, gale winds and tons of sea. So Poseidon has destroyed the swimmer's ship, and now he's stuck at sea and he has to swim a long distance back to shore. Few men can keep alive through a big surf to crawl, clotted with brine on kindly beaches. So it's saying that few men could have swam this far distance and stayed alive, but the swimmer was able to. So finally, after that extreme distance of swimming, he gets back to the shore, and he's enjoy that repetition, showing us just how much joy he's feeling, knowing that the abyss is behind, that this dark period is now behind him in his past. And Penelope rejoiced in the same way, looking at her husband with her arms around him as though they're going to hug forever. And what a beautiful thought to end on. So now let's talk about this epic simile. So whatever we say about the swimmer, we could say it's also true for Odysseus and Penelope. So we could talk about the having to swim an extreme length, leading to exhaustion from Odysseus. We could talk about this idea of the gods tormenting man and making their lives more difficult as a connection to both Poseidon and other gods, making Odysseus' journey home more difficult. Few men can keep alive. We could talk about the danger that the swimmer faced in connection to the danger that Odysseus faced, not only on his journey, but at home, getting rid of the suitors. And then finally, knowing that the abyss is behind. That's a great phrase, saying that everything is behind them. All the danger, it's over. They can finally feel relieved. They are safe from any other danger from the suitors. And it's now an emotional, joyful moment for both the swimmer getting back to shore and for Odysseus and Penelope. So what I would recommend for when you talk about the epic simile, both in passage 5 and in passage 2 with Penelope and the God-fearing king, you first want to talk about what is being compared to what. So for this one, how Odysseus and Penelope are being compared to the swimmer, and then give some information about what happened to the swimmer, because that's going to inform our understanding of Odysseus and Penelope at the beginning of that epic simile. But I think this is a good start, or not a good start, a good addition to what you have, so that you'll have a really strong analysis of these passages for when we see them on the test. So now, what we're going to do next, and we can see, ah, beautiful image. Odysseus and Penelope are finally together. So what you're going to do next is you're going to create 10 questions based upon part two that are going to help you study. And I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to work on that, and then you'll have the rest of the period to quiz one another. And if you get finished with your questions before those 10 minutes, obviously you could start working with others who are also done. But I want you guys to think about, some important parts of the story that you should recall for the test. And then tomorrow you'll finish up watching the movie, and you could again continue to study. Friday we'll have the test, and you'll have to turn in the completed part two study guide. So if you guys have any questions when I'm gone, you could email me, or you could shoot me a message on Google Classroom. But for now, I think you're pretty well set, and you have all your materials. You have your passage analysis, you have this video, you have the study guide, and you have the review sheet. So I think you're going to be well prepared for the test. So I will see you guys when I get back on Friday.